Hi everyone, I'm happy that you've all come to join me for another episode of Killer Bites. Today I'm going to tell you all about David Parker Ray, also known as the Toy Box Killer. Besides the normal horrifying details we find in each one of these stories, this one has a particular fact that I just can't wrap my head around. People like to keep things in the family, typically pertaining to going into a family business. In this instance, David had his daughter Jessie as an accomplice to his crimes. I mean, that's dark. Our story begins on November 6, 1939 in Belen, New Mexico, when David Parker Ray was born. His parents were mainly out of the picture due to financial reasons, so David and his younger sister Peggy lived with their grandfather. Their grandfather was a fundamentalist disciplinarian, showing little affection. Although they lived with their grandfather, David would see his violent alcoholic father Cecil often enough, and Cecil would supply David with nude magazines. What really made it bad was that these magazines were sadomasochistic, depicting sexual gratification from the infliction of physical pain or humiliation. And David was fascinated with this. Yikes. David was a shy and socially awkward kid, scared of girls and bullied by kids at his school, so he was often alone. Throughout his teenage years, David's obsession of bondage and other explicit and aggressive acts just grew stronger. With all of his alone time, he would draw pictures of his fantasies. At 13, David's sister discovered these sadomasochistic drawings, as well as the nude photographs of violent bondage acts. His secret obsession was no longer a secret, and if he had felt any shame, that shame didn't deter him because his fantasies of these violent acts with women continued on. After high school, David became a mechanic and then joined the army, being honorably discharged in the end. By the time David was 27, he had been married and divorced twice. His first marriage resulted in one child, a son, also named David. It was at 27 when he met his third wife, 18-year-old Glenda Burdine. She was already a mother of one before they met, and together they had a daughter named Glenda Jean Ray. Within 3 years of being married, David grew bored and left his family behind. At 30, David gave in to the free love movement and began hitchhiking across New Mexico. It was 1969 and the hippie revolution was in full swing. It's hard to say exactly when David started committing crimes, but a couple that owned a truck stop that David was staying at during those hitchhiking days recounted David arriving with his girlfriend Sally. Sally confided in the couple that David was her first relationship and that she was pregnant. A few days later, Sally went missing. That couple had no reason to not trust David, so when they asked him where she was and he said she was a free spirit and took off, well, they believed him. Pretty soon after Sally's disappearance, David grew tired of his hippie nomadic lifestyle and went back to Glenda and their daughter to try and patch things up. They were together for about 10 years before splitting for good. Those 10 years saw David behaving like the archetypal father figure when in reality, behind closed doors, his obsession with sadomasochism advanced. When the marriage between David and Glenda was over, David picked up once more. He married his fourth wife, Joni Lee, and they settled in Elephant Butte, New Mexico. The house in Elephant Butte was on Bass Road, close to the reservoir that brings thousands of tourists each year. And David was doing quite well as a mechanic and would travel regularly for work. His marriage track record wasn't particularly strong, and unsurprisingly, this fourth marriage ended as quickly as it had begun. For someone who was shy and scared of girls in high school, 4 marriages seems like quite the accomplishment. The 1980s were spent going deeper and deeper into the bondage scene. David had an insatiable thirst for violence that came with this type of pleasure. It is also during this time that David started kidnapping women. He had purchased a shipping container and he would bring these women to the shipping container, which he had turned into the toy box. The toy box was a windowless container that David had converted into a torture chamber. He would find young women or girls, bring them to the toy box, hold them hostage for days, and then drug them. With no bodies ever found, there was no way to pinpoint the exact number of women that were brought there that never returned home. David had accomplices. He somehow found women, mainly girlfriends of his, that wanted to be a part of helping him kidnap these women. After his marriage to Joni Lee ended, David began dating Cindy Hendy. Cindy was the most notable girlfriend of his to be his accomplice. In March of 1996, David and Cindy were driving around in their RV when they came across a woman who was working the streets. Cynthia Jaramillo had rules in place to stay as safe as possible in an otherwise unpredictable job. One of those rules was not to get into an RV. But for some reason that night, she threw some caution to the wind and got in the RV with David. When they got to the back of the RV, David pulled out a badge that said he was FBI. Cynthia knew that wasn't right, so she bolted for the door, and as her hand was on it, David yelled for Cindy. This threw Cynthia off because she hadn't given him a real name. But that's when Cindy Hendy appeared from behind a curtain and shocked Cynthia with a cattle prod. Now handcuffed, Cynthia knew that the only way to get out was to try and get free and wait for the RV to slow down enough so she could jump out. She was able to unscrew the cabinet she was handcuffed to and got to her feet, still crouching down.
As they were driving off, I was able to get the handcuffs off of the cabinet door, and I was waiting for them to slow down enough so I could jump out through the window or try to break out the door, but that did not happen. For some reason, he had to stomp on the brakes and I tumbled over. And when he realized I tumbled over and I was loose, they pulled over. Well, she jumped through the middle part of she came through the middle part of the seats and grabbed me right away. And I had my hands behind my back. And he pulled over and they had a gun and they took all my clothes off.
That was the last thing Cynthia remembers before coming to in the toy box. The FBI says that David recorded an audio tape in 1993 that he played to each of his victims. Cynthia woke up to the sound of his voice.
Yeah, it was an audio recording, and it started off his voice calling me, saying hello, and that I was picked because of my size, my body shape.
Undoubtedly, someone's going to be looking for you. They don't have any idea where you're at. You don't even know where you're at. We're always very careful about that. There are not going to be any knights in shining armor coming to rescue you. You are strictly on your own, and under the circumstances, I bet that is a scary thought.
Cynthia knew that the only way she would walk out alive was if she escaped, and after 3 days of torture, she finally got her chance. Cindy had gotten a phone call about a possible business deal. Whether it was excitement or carelessness, she left Cynthia alone, and she left her keys in plain sight.
I was able to get the keys, and by pulling the table to me with my feet. And I reached through the bars and got the keys, and I pushed the table back with my foot, but it snagged on the carpet and went crooked. I curled up in a ball where the lock was at against the wall, and I was trying every key, and it just seemed like nothing was opening it.
She was on the second key when Cindy came back into the room, seeing Cynthia in the middle of trying to break free.
And she came in and she seen I had the keys. At that point, I don't know where this ice pick came from, if she had it, if she stabbed me first or what, but I know I got beat with a lamp. I had been stabbed, and the phone ended up on the bed with me. But the lock came loose, and I got it unlocked.
Cynthia bolted out the door. Naked and covered in blood, it was the first time she had been outside in days. She just chose a direction and started to run.
As I was running up the road, up Bass Road, I didn't know where I was at. I did not know where I was at. I did not know what direction I was going. I didn't know where to go. I was just looking for somewhere that looked like somebody was there. And I ran right into this trailer, and the lady was doing dishes. And I busted in her door and I grabbed her from behind and I asked her to help me. I had no clothes on. And she goes, "Are you okay?" And she grabbed the phone and dialed 911. And I remember she sat me down on this white stool, and I was bloody and naked.
They were able to react calmly, put a robe on Cynthia, and call 911. Ray and Hendy were caught. In exchange for a plea deal, Cindy turned on David almost immediately. She confessed to investigators that David Parker Ray had told her about 14 murders that he had committed and where some of the bodies had been dumped. She spoke of the different ways that he would torture his victims, truly horrific acts, and sometimes would have his friends come over to take part. Cindy gave up the names of other accomplices, which included David's daughter, Glenda Jessie Ray, his daughter. According to Cindy, Jessie and her friend, Dennis Roy Yancey, had participated in the murder of Dennis's former girlfriend, 22-year-old Marie Parker. As the investigation continued, evidence of more victims emerged. Angelica Montano came forward, telling the authorities about how she was abducted by Ray a little over a month before Cynthia Jaramillo. She had reported her kidnapping, but for some reason the police didn't investigate it. While investigating, police found photos and video of another victim in the trailer. The victim in the video turned out to be Kelly Garrett. Police were able to track down Kelly in Colorado, and she testified that she had gotten into a fight with her husband and decided to go out and play pool with friends. On July 24th, 1996, Jessie Ray, who just happened to be friends with Kelly, took her to the Blue Water Saloon in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, where she drugged the beer Kelly was drinking. When Kelly had made it to the parking lot of the bar, Jesse hit her from behind, knocking her unconscious. David took her to his trailer and attached a dog collar and leash to her. She awoke, but over the course of the next 2 days, she blacked out multiple times. When David noticed she was still breathing, despite the drugs and the torture, he went a step further and slashed her throat open. Thinking she was dead, he dumped her on the side of the road. Miraculously, she came to, but couldn't remember what had happened. She was treated for her injuries, but neither her husband nor police believed her story of awakening in the middle of nowhere with no recollection of what had happened after she'd left the bar. Her husband believed she had been cheating on him the night she was attacked and promptly filed for divorce. And that's when Kelly relocated to Colorado. Despite Cindy's testimony and the stories the survivors told, the FBI was unable to prove that David Parker Ray had killed anyone. He was only tried in the cases of the survivors. 3 separate trials, one for Cynthia Jaramillo, one for Angelica Montano, and one for Kelly Garrett. The trial for Cynthia Jaramillo led to a mistrial, followed by a retrial, and conviction on all 12 counts for which he was accused. The trial for Angelica Montano was never brought forward as Angelica died of a drug overdose, taking her testimony to the grave. Finally, in the case of Kelly Garrett, David agreed to a plea bargain under the terms that he would be sentenced to 224 years in prison in exchange for his daughter Jessie receiving a reduced sentence. Cindy Hendy was tried as an accomplice and received a sentence of 36 years. After serving 18 of those years, Cindy was eligible for parole. Glenda, Jessie Ray, was tried on charges of kidnapping and received a 2.5-year prison sentence and an additional 5 years to be served on probation. Finally, Dennis Roy Yancey was convicted with the strangulation and murder of Marie Parker. He received 2 15-year sentences and was released in 2010 after only serving 11 years. But after 3 months of being out, he violated his parole, resulting in his return to custody. David Parker Ray never got to serve his sentence. On May 28, 2002, just as he was about to be transferred to prison, he suffered a heart attack and died at the age of 62. In November of 2002, the toy box was opened to the public with the hope that it would lead to more surviving victims coming forward. In October of 2011, the FBI performed a search of McRae Canyon near Elephant Butte Lake, looking for more potential victims, but found none. And that is the story of the toy box killer. Although there was some closure with his arrest and trial, having him pass away before serving any type of sentence sounds like justice was not served. Also, it should be said, believe women when they're coming forward, especially when it's any type of story of abuse. What are your thoughts? How did he get away with these crimes for so long? And do you find it shocking that his daughter participated in these crimes? I mean, for me, that just feels bone-chilling. Let me know in the comments below, and have a great rest of your day. I'm Jason, and thanks again for watching Killer Bites.